9 Terrible Men by Edgar Wallace. This is recorded to celebrate the 9th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There were 9 terrible men in the forest of Otum, so native report had it. 9 terrible men who lived on an island set in a swamp, and the swamp was hard to come by, being in the midst of a vast forest. Only a monkey or a leopard could find a way to the inhabitants of this island, they themselves being privy to the secret ways. No man of the Isisi, of the Ngombe, of the Akasava, or of the river tribes attempted to track down the 9, for, as it was generally known, most powerful jujus guarded all paths that led to the secret place. 9 outlawed men, with murder and worse upon their souls, they came together, God knows how, and preyed upon their world. They raided with impunity, being impartial as to whether Isisi or Ngombe paid toll. By night they would steal forth in single file, silent as death, no twig cracking in their path, no word spoken. As relentless as the soldier ant in his march of destruction, they made their way without hindrance to the village they had chosen for the scene of their operations, took what they wanted, and returned. Sometimes they wanted food, sometimes spears, for these lords of the wood were superior to craftsmanship. Sometimes a woman or two went and never came back. Such lawless communities were not uncommon. Occasionally very ordinary circumstances put an end to them. Some there were that flourished, like the people who were not all alike. The 9 terrible men of the Otum existed because nothing short of an army corps could have surrounded them, and because, as Sanders thought, they were not a permanent body, but dispersed at times to their several homes. Sanders once sent 2 companies of houses to dislodge the 9, but they did nothing, for the simple reason that never once did they get within shooting distance. Then Sanders came himself, and caught little else than a vicious attack of malarial fever. He sent messages to all the chiefs of the people within a radius of 100 miles, to kill at sight any of the 9, offering certain rewards. After 3 palpably inoffensive men of the Okori tribe had been killed, and the reward duly claimed, Sanders countermanded the order. For 2 years the 9 ravaged at will. Then a man of the Isisi, one Fembini, found grace. Fembini became a Christian, though there is no harm in that. This is not satire, but a statement with a reservation. There are certain native men who embrace the faith and lose quality thereby, but Fembini apparently was a Christian and a better man, except... Here is another reservation. Up at Mosenkusu, a certain Ruth Aldine labored for the cause. She, as I have previously described, being a medical missionary, and pretty to boot. White folk would call her pretty because she had regular features, a faultless complexion, and a tall, well-modelled shape. Black folk thought she was plain, because her hips were not as they should be by convention, nor was she developed according to their standards. Also, from the Ngombe point of view, her fair long hair was ridiculous, and her features like a bird. Mr. Commissioner Sanders thought she was very pretty indeed, when he allowed himself to think about her. He did not think about her more often than he could help, for 2 reasons. The only one of which that is any business of yours or mine, being that she was an enormous responsibility. He had little patches of white hair on either side of his temple, when he allowed his hair to grow long enough for these to become visible, which he called grimly his missionary hairs. The safety of the solitary stations set in the wilds were a source of great worry. You must understand that missionaries are very good people. Those ignoramuses who sneer at them place themselves in the same absurd position as those who sneer at Nelson, or speak slightingly of other heroes. Missionaries take terrible risks. They cut themselves adrift from the material life which is worth the living. They endure hardships incomprehensible to the uninitiated. They suffer from tempestuous illness, which finds them hale and hearty in the morning, and leave their feeble bodies at the edge of death at sunset. And all this they do, said Bosambo of Monrovia, philosophically and thoughtfully, because of certain mysteries which happened when the world was young, and of a famous man called Jesu. Now I think that is the greatest mystery of all. Sanders appreciated the disinterestedness of the work, was immensely impressed by the courage of the people who came to labor in the unhealthy field, but all the time he fretfully wished they wouldn't. His feelings were those of a professional lion-tamer who sees a light-hearted amateur stepping into the cage of the most savage of his beasts. They were the feelings of the skilled mateador who watches the novice's awkward handling of an Andalusian bull, a troubled mateador, with a purple cloak held ready, and one neatly shod foot on the barrier, ready to spring into the ring at the novello's need. The missionary patches grew larger and whiter in the first few months of Ruth Aldine's presence at Mosenkusu, for this village was too near to the wild Ngombe, too near the erratic Isisi for Sanders' liking. Sanders might easily have made a mistake in his anxiety. He might have sent messengers to the two peoples, or gone in person, threatening them with death and worse than death if they harmed the girl. But that would have aroused a sense of importance in their childlike bosoms, and when the time came, as it assuredly would come, that their stomachs were angry against him, some chief would say, "Behold, here is a woman who is as the core of Sandy's eye. If we do her harm, we shall be revenged on Sandy." And since children do not know any other tomorrow than the tomorrow of good promise, it would have gone badly with the lady missionary. Instead, Sanders laid upon Bosambo, chief of the Okori, charge of this woman, and Bosambo he trusted in all big things, though in the matter of goods movable and goods convertible he had no such confidence. When Fambini of the Isisi was converted from paganism to Christianity, Sanders was fussing about the little creeks which abound on the big river, looking for a man named Oko, who, after a long and mysterious absence, had returned to his village, killed his wife, and fled to the bush. The particular bush happened to be in the neighborhood of the mission station. Otherwise, Sanders might have been content to allow his policemen to carry out the good work. But no sooner did news come that Oko had broken for that section of the Ngombe country which impinges on Mosenkusu, than Sanders went flying upriver in his steamer, because something told him he had identified one of the 9 men. Wrote Sergeant Ahmed the Hausa, who prided himself on his English, to his wife at headquarters. At daylight, when search for murderer was officially resumed, came our Lord Sunda, very actively angry. By orders I took left bank of Kulula River with 3 men, being ordered to shoot aforesaid Oko, if resistance offered. Abibu, sergeant, took right or other bank, and our Lord searched bush, Truly, Oko must be a very important man, that Sunda comes officially searching for same, saying bitter reproach words to his humble servants. Ahmed's picture of his chief's agitation may be a little exaggerated, but I do not doubt that there was a substratum of fact therein. On the second day of the hunt, Sanders' steamer was tied up at the mission station, and he found himself walking in the cool of the evening with Ruth Aldine. So he learnt about Fembini, the Eye-Sissy man who had found the light, and was hot and eager for salvation. Said Sanders, displaying no great enthusiasm, but she was too elated over her first convert to notice the lack of warmth in his tone. "It is just splendid," she said, her grey eyes alight and her pretty face kindling with the thought, "especially when you remember, Mr. Sanders, that I have only an imperfect knowledge of the language." "Are you sure," asked the incredulous Sanders, "that Fembini understands what it is all about?" "Oh, yes." She smiled at the commissioner's simplicity. "Why, he met me halfway, as it were. He came out to meet the truth. He—" "Fembini?" said Sanders thoughtfully. "I think I know the man. If I remember him aright, he is not the sort of person who would get religion if he did not see a strong business end to it." She frowned a little. Her eyebrows made a level line over resentful eyes. "I think that is unworthy of you," she said coldly. He looked at her, the knuckle of his front finger at his lips. She was very pretty, he thought, or else he had been so long removed from the society of white women that she seemed beautiful only because she stood before a background of brutal ugliness. Slim, straight, grave-eyed, complexion faultless, though tanned by the African sun, features regular and delicate, hair, a quantity, russet brown. Sanders shook his head. "I wish to heaven you weren't monkeying about in this infernal country," he said. "That is beside the question," she replied with a little smile. "We are talking of Fembini, and I think you are being rather horrid." They reached the big square hut that Sanders had built for her, and climbed the wooden steps that led to the stoop. Sanders made no reply, but when she had disappeared into the interior of the hut to make him some tea, he beckoned Abibu, who had followed him at a respectful distance. "Go you," he said, "and bring me Fembini of the Eye-Sissy." He was stirring his tea whilst the girl was giving him a rosy account of her work, when Fembini came, a tall man of middle age, wearing the trousers and waistcoat which were the outward and visible signs of his inward and spiritual grace. "Come near, Fembini," said Sanders gently. The man walked with confidence up the steps onto the stoop, and without invitation drew a chair toward him and seated himself. Sanders said nothing. He looked at the man for a very long time, then, "Who asked you to sit in my presence?" he said softly. "Lord," said Fembini pompously, "since I have found the blessed truth—" Something in Sanders' eyes caused him to rise hurriedly. "You may sit on the ground," said Sanders quietly, "after the manner of your people, and I will sit on this chair after the manner of mine. For behold, Fembini, even the blessed truth shall not make black white, or white black, nor shall it make you equal with Sandy, who is your master." "Lord, that is so," said the sullen Fembini, "yet we are all equal in the eyes of the Great One." "Then there are 1,000,000 people in the Eye-Sissy, in the Ngombe, the Akasava and the Okwori, who are your equals," said Sanders, "and it is no shame for you to do as they do." Which was unanswerable, according to Fambini's sense of logic. The girl had listened to the talk between her novitiate and the commissioner with rising wrath, for she had not Sanders' knowledge of native peoples. "I think it is rather small of you, Mr. Sanders," she said hotly. "It is a much more important matter that a heathen should be brought to the truth than that your dignity should be preserved." Sanders frowned horribly. He had no society manners and was not used to disputation. "I do not agree with you, Miss Aldine," he said a little gruffly, "for whilst the Isissi cannot see the ecstatic condition of his soul which leads him to be disrespectful to me, they can and do see the gross materialism of his sitting body." A thought struck him, and he turned to the man. That thought made all the difference between life and death to Fambini. "Fambini," he said, relapsing into the language of the Isissi, "you are a rich man by all accounts." "Lord, it is so." "And wives, how many have you?" "4, Lord." Sanders nodded and turned to the girl. "He has 4 wives," he said. "Well?" There was a hint of defiance in the questioning. "Well?" "He has 4 wives," repeated Sanders. "What is your view on this matter?" "He shall marry 1 in the Christian style," she said, flushing. "Oh, you know, Mr. Sanders, it is impossible for a man to be a Christian and have more wives than 1. Sanders turned to the man again. "In this matter of wives, Fambini," he said gently, "how shall you deal with the women of your house?" Fambini wriggled his bare shoulders uncomfortably. "Lord, I shall put them all away save 1, he said sulkily, "for that is the blessed way." Said Sanders for the 2nd time that morning. He was silent for a long time. Then, "It is rather a problem," he said. "It presents no difficulty to my mind," said the girl stiffly. She was growing very angry, though Sanders did not realize the fact, being unused to the ways of white women. "I think it is rather horrid of you, Mr. Sanders, to discourage this man, to put obstacles in his faith." "I put no obstacle," interrupted the commissioner. He was short of speech, being rather so intent upon his subject that he took no account of the fine feelings of a zealous lady missionary. "But I cannot allow this to happen in my district. This man has 4 wives. Each of them has borne him children. What justice or what Christianity is there in turning loose 3 women who have served this man?" Here was a problem for the girl, and in her desperation she used an argument which was unanswerable. "The law allows this," she said. "These things happen all over the world where missionary work is in progress. Perhaps I could bring the women to understand. Perhaps I could explain—" "You couldn't explain the babies out of existence," said Sanders brutally. That ended the discussion, for, with a look of scorn and disgust, she passed into the hut, leaving Sanders a prey to some emotion. He turned a cold eye to the offending Fambini. "It seems," he said, "that a man, by becoming a Christian, has less mouths to fill. Now I must investigate this matter." Fambini regarded him apprehensively, for if a woman is questioned, who knows what she will say? And it was fairly unimportant to the man if he had 1 wife or 40. There was no possibility of searching any further that night for the erring Oko, and Sanders was rowed across the river in his canoe to interview the wives of the new convert. He found 1 woman who viewed the coming change with considerable philosophy, and 3 who were very shrill and very voluble. "Lord," said one of these three, in that insolent tone which only native women assume, "this white witch has taken our man." "I do not hear well," said Sanders quickly, "yet I thought I heard a word I do not like." He whiffled his pliant stick till it hummed a tune. "Lord," said the woman, dropping her voice and speaking more mildly, "this god-lady has taken our man." "God-ladies do not take men," said Sanders. "Rather they influence their spirits, that they may be better men." "Fembini will be no better and no worse," said the woman bitterly, "for he goes to the forest by night. Often he has arisen from my side, and when he is gone, behold, the 9 terrible men have come from near by and taken that which they wanted." She stopped abruptly. There was horror in the eyes which met the commissioner's. In her anger she had said too much. "That is foolish talk," said Sanders easily. He knew there would be no more information here, and he played to quiet her fears. He strolled through the village, talked a while with the head man, and returned to his canoe. Once on the Zaire, he summoned Abibu. "Take 3 men and bring Fembini to me," he said, "and be very ready to shoot him, for I have heard certain things." He waited for 10 minutes, then Abibu returned, alone. "Fembini has gone into the forest," he said, "also the god-lady." Sanders looked at him. "How?" "Lord, this Fembini is a Christian, and desired to speak with the god-woman of the new magic. So they walked together, the god-woman reading from a book. Also he had a gift for her, which he bought from a French trader." "I see," said Sanders. He poured himself out a stiff glass of whiskey, and his hand shook a little. Then he lifted down a sporting rifle that hung on the wall of his cabin, broke open 2 packets of cartridges, and dropped them into his coat pocket. "Let the men come on quickly," he said, "you commanding." "Lord, there are other sergeants," said Abibu. "I go with you, for I am at your right hand, though death waits me." "As you will," said Sanders roughly. He went through the missionary compound, stopping only that a boy should point out the direction the 2 had taken. Then he moved swiftly toward the forest, Abibu at his heels. He followed the beaten track for 100 yards. Then he stopped and sniffed like a dog. He went on a little farther and came back on his tracks. He stopped and picked up some pieces of broken glass and turned aside from the path, following his nose. Ruth Aldine had supreme faith in the power of the word which makes martyrs. "You must have no doubt, Fembini," she said in her halting Icisi, "for with light, such as the word brings, all things will be made plain to you." They were beyond the confines of the little mission station, walking slowly toward the forest. She read little extracts from the book she carried, and so full of her subject was she, that she did not observe that they had passed the straggling trees, the outposts of the big forest. When she did notice this, she turned. "More I will tell you, Fembini," she said. "Lady, tell me now," he begged, "for Sandy has made me doubt." She frowned. What mischief can a materialist work? She had liked Sanders. Now, for one resentful moment, she almost hated him. "There are white men who doubt," she said, "and who place pitfalls in the way." "Also this have I bought for you," said Fembini, "paying 1 bag of salt." From the leather pouch at his side he produced a long, flat flask. She smiled as she recognized the floral label of the abominable scent beloved of the native. "This I bought for you, teacher," he said, and removed the stopper, so that the unoffending evening reeked of a sudden with the odor of musk. that you might protect me against Sandy, who is no god-man but a devil." She took the bottle and hastily replaced the stopper. "Sandy is no devil," she said gently, "and will do you no harm." "He has crossed the river," said Fambini sulkily, and there was a curious glitter in his eyes. "And he will speak with my wives, and they will tell him evil things of me." She looked at him gravely. "What evil things can they say?" she asked. "They can lie," he said shortly, "and Sandy will bring his rope, and I shall die." She smiled. "I do not think you need fear," she said, and began to walk back. But he stood in front of her, and at that instant she realized her danger, and the color faded from her face. "If Sandy comes after me to kill me," he said slowly, "I shall say to him, 'Behold, I have a woman of your kind, and if you do not pardon me, you will be sorry.'" She thought quickly, then of a sudden leapt past him and fled in the direction of the station. He was after her in a flash. She heard the fast patter of his feet, and suddenly felt his arm about her waist. She screamed, but there was none to hear her, and his big hand covered her mouth. He shook her violently. "You live or you die," he said, "but if you cry out, I will beat you till you die." He half carried, half dragged her in the direction of the forest. She was nearly dead with fear. She was dimly conscious of the fact that he did not take the beaten path, that he turned at right angles and moved unerringly through the wood, following a path of his own knowing. As he turned, she made another attempt to secure her liberty. She still held the scent flask in her hand, and struck at him with all her might. He caught her arm and nearly broke it. The stopper fell out, and her dress was drenched with the vile perfume. He wrenched the flask from her hand and threw it away. Grasping her by the arm, he led her on. She was nearly exhausted when he stopped, and she sank, an inert heap, to the ground. She dare not faint, though she was on the verge of such a breakdown. How long they had been travelling she had no idea. The sun was setting. This she guessed rather than knew, for no sunlight penetrated the dim aisles. Fambini watched her. He sat with his back to a tree and regarded her thoughtfully. After a while he rose. "Come," he said. They moved on in silence. She made no appeal to him. She knew now the futility of speech. Her mind was still bewildered. Why, it asked incoherently. Why had this man professed Christianity? "Fambini," she faltered, "I have been kind to you." "Woman," he said grimly, "you may be kinder." She said no more. The horror of the thing began to take shape. She half stopped, and he grasped her arm roughly. "By my head you shall live," he said, "if Sandy gives his word that none of us shall hang, for we are the terrible men, and Sandy has smelt me out." There was a gleam of hope in this speech, if it was only as a hostage that they held her. Night had fallen when they came to water. Here Fambini halted. He searched about in the undergrowth and dragged to view a section of hollow tree trunk. Inside were 2 sticks of ironwood, and, squatting down before the lokaki, he rattled a metallic tattoo. For 10 minutes he played his tuneless rhythm. When he stopped, there came a faint reply from somewhere across the lake. They waited, the girl and her captor, for nearly half an hour. She strained her ears for the sound of oars, not knowing that the water did not extend for more than 100 yards, and that beyond and around lay the great swamp, wherein stood the island headquarters of the 9. The first intimation of the presence of others was a stealthy rustle. Then, through the gloom, she saw the men coming toward her. Fembini grasped her arm and led her forward. He exchanged a few words with the newcomers in a dialect she could not understand. There was a brief exchange of questions, and then the party moved on. The ground beneath her feet grew soft and soddened. Sometimes the water was up to her ankles. The leader of the men picked his way unerringly, now following a semicircular route, now turning off at right angles, now winding in and out, till she lost all sense of direction. Her legs were like lead, her head was swimming, and she felt she was on the point of collapse when, suddenly, the party reached dry land. A few minutes later they reached the tumble-down village which the outlaws had built themselves. A fire was burning, screened from view by the arrangement of the huts which had been built in a crescent. The girl was shown a hut and thrust inside. Soon afterwards a woman brought her a bowl of boiled fish and a gourd of water. In her broken Icisi she begged the woman to stay with her, but she was evidently of the Ngombe people and did not understand. A few minutes later she was alone. Outside the hut about the fire sat 8 of the 9 terrible men. One of these was Oko of the Icisi, a man of some power. "This woman I do not like," he said, "and by my way of thinking, Fembini is a fool, and a son of a fool, to bring her, unless she comes as other women have come to serve us." "Lord Oko," said Fembini, "I am more skilled in the ways of white folk than you, and I tell you that if we keep this woman here, it shall be well with us. For if Sandy shall catch you or me or any of us, we shall say to him, 'There is a woman with us whom you greatly prize, and if you hang me, behold, you kill her also.'" Still Oko was not satisfied. "I also know white people and their ways," he said. "Sandy would have left us. Now he will not rest till we are scattered and dead, for Sandy has a memory like the river which never ceases to flow." A man of the Akasava suggested an evil thing. "That we shall consider," said Oko. He had already decided. He had none of the subtlety of mind which distinguished Fembini. He saw the end, and was for crowding in the space of life left to him as much of life as his hand could grasp. They sat in palaver till early in the morning. The firelight reflected on the polished skin of their bodies. Then Oko left the circle and crept to the girl's hut. They saw him stoop and enter, and heard a little scream. "Oko has killed her," said Fembini. "It is best," said the other men. Fembini rose and went to the hut. "Oko," he called softly, then stooped and went in. Facing him was a ragged square of dim light, where a great hole had been cut in the farther side of the hut. "Oko!" he called sharply. Then 2 hands of steel caught him by the throat, and 2 others pulled his legs from under him. He went to the ground, too terrified to resist. "Fembini," said a soft voice in his ear, "I have been waiting for you." He was rolled onto his face, and he made no resistance. His hands were pulled behind, and he felt the cold steel bands encircle his wrist, and heard a snick as they fastened. He was as expeditiously gagged. "As for Oko," said Sanders' voice, "he is dead, and if you had heard him cry, you also would have been dead." That ended the one-sided conversation, Sanders and his sergeant sitting patiently in their lair, waiting for the rest of the men to come. With the morning arrived a detachment of Hausas under Sergeant Ahmed, following the trail Sanders had followed. There were 4 dead men to be buried, including him who had stood on guard at the edge of the swamp. There was a white-faced girl to be guarded back across the swamp to the seclusion of the forest, and with her went the women of the outlaws' village. Fembini and his 4 companions stood up for judgment. "One thing I would ask you, Fembini," said Sanders, "and that is this. You are by some account a Christian. Do you practice this magic, or are you for the jujus and gods of your fathers?" "Lord," said Fembini eagerly, "I am a Christian in all ways. Remember this, master, I am of your faith." Sanders, with his lips parted and his eyes narrowed, looked at the man. "Then it is proper that I should give you time to say your prayers," he said. "Abiboo, we hang this man last." "I see that you are a devil," said Fembini. "Otherwise you would not follow us in the night with none to show you the way. Now I tell you, Sandy, that I am no Christian, for all God-folk are foolish save you, and I know that you are no God-man. Therefore, if I am to hang, let me hang with the rest." Sanders nodded. End of 9 Terrible Men by Edgar Wallace. Read by Bev Stevens.